here with all of you today. Exciting to hear about commencement and graduation season. We are at Rice, we are both happy and sad for all the seniors that are graduating, that have been with us for so long. But it's great to see the excitement and joy in their faces, like someone put in the chat. So glad to hear more about what is happening on your campuses. A bit about me. My name is Carla Ortega-Santori. I have two last names because I am Puerto Rican, and in Puerto Rico, if you don't use your mom's last name, someone will go, "What, you don't have a mom?" So I use both of my last names, so that's why I go by Carla Ortega-Santori. While I share my screen, I'll explain more about the relationship that we have with ACE at Rice. So I work at Rice University, specifically the Doerr Institute for New Leaders. And at the Doerr Institute, our mission is to elevate our students' capacity to lead. And the second part of our mission is to elevate leader development in higher education. So that second part of our mission is what I work more closely with. And that is how this classification was born. But before I get into that, there's so many things happening in higher ed in the world. So one of the first things that folks ask me is, why leader development now? Like, why should we care about leadership for public purpose, or LPP? Because leadership for public purpose is a mouthful for me sometimes. So I'll say LPP. First off, our role in developing leaders is undeniable in higher ed, right? What we do and don't do has impact. When we choose to not be intentional in our leader development strategies or efforts, our communities suffer, our students suffer, faculty, staff. And what we found at Rice, with some research that our team has done, is that if we don't have a uniform strategy, our students will not grow as leaders. So our data that Dr. Ryan Brown worked on revealed that students' capacity to lead does not increase significantly throughout their 4 years if there is no intentional leadership development programming. So unless they engage in this organized leader development activities, their leadership capacity, their identity as a leader will be the same as when they graduated high school. So that's not great. Leadership is also mentioned in more than 800 universities and colleges' mission statements. But when we take a closer look, right, at leadership program budgets, they're often very small. We have very few staff and no measurement of efficacy or infrastructure. We question if universities, writ large, infrastructure, the leadership, the executive team is really being held accountable for what is mentioned in these mission statements. And also, leadership programs are usually scattered without a uniform strategy. A lot of great people doing greater work, but it might be similar. There might be some convergence. And if you've ever done some benchmarking or some research, and you call an institution to know more about their LD efforts, their leadership programming, you may have been redirected a few times, right? To the Leadership Center, to the School of Engineering, to the business school, so there's so many people doing all these great things, but they're not talking to each other. And there's really no oversight for a central strategy per se to prepare our students as leaders and faculty and staff. So a lot of institutions say that they're developing tomorrow's leaders, but there's no central strategy. Efforts are scattered. And we know for a fact that students aren't growing as leaders just spontaneously. So what we are proposing, what we are doing to try to fix this is using the great framework that was laid out by the Carnegie Foundation, first off with the CE classification, which some of you may be very, very familiar with. So the Carnegie Elective Classification for Leadership for Public Purpose is a way for colleges and universities to examine how they develop leaders. Everyone involved in the institution has to work together to put this application. To answer it, this process is meant to help a college or university improve and celebrate these efforts to develop leaders. And if you are familiar with the CE classification, you know that the Carnegie Elective classifications were created to gather information that isn't covered in things like the standard or universal Carnegie classification. So the system that designates what we call R1s, R2s, et cetera. This is information that is just not contained in that system. It is a self-study, so it is completely optional and voluntary, and it looks at everything that an institution does to develop leaders. How deeply is leader development, leadership education, leadership for public purpose, whatever the concept it is on your campus, how embedded is it into campus culture is what we try to find. It was first launched, our first cycle was in 2024, and it has been revised and launched for a second time for this 2027 cycle. And if you, again, are familiar with the CE classification, you'll know that the year in the title references the year in which the designations are awarded. So our 2024 cycle is named that way because our institutions were classified in 2024, or we announced who was classified in 2024. So I've been talking about leadership for public purpose, but we haven't talked about the definition that the Carnegie Foundation and we sort of came together to articulate. And you will see the definition on the screen, and we could spend so much time on the definition. I'll just go over it, sort of at a bird's eye view. And essentially, it is leadership that advances the public good through inclusive, collaborative, ethical practices. The public purpose part of the definition, right? What you define as public purpose, what these public goods can be, will be different for each campus. And we invite folks to examine that in their applications and to examine what their LPP definition or framework or conceptual, model is on their campus, even if it's not named LPP, even if that's not the, formal title. It is not just student facing, so it spans faculty, staff, even partnerships, the mission, governance, et cetera. It emphasizes democracy, equity, community well-being, all these great things that most of you might be very familiar with if you work with the NC campus engagement closely, because I took a look at the mission and the efforts, and it seems very aligned. If we were to look for a more operational definition, this is what that second part of the definition would be. And basically, it tells us that the classification isn't just about a single program or office. It looks at how leadership for public purpose is embedded across the institution. It also recognizes that higher education has a responsibility to prepare people at all levels. So not just students, although that is, I would say, like 75 to 80% of the focus for most applications, and most of the evidence comes from the student-facing programs. So it looks at how all these people are being prepared to lead ethically and effectively in service of the public good. And most importantly, the classification also asks institutions to track and assess their leader development or leadership development efforts, not just to prove impact, but to also continuously improve, to learn, and to grow, which is a big part of the Carnegie Foundation's framework. Who should consider applying? Really, all institution types and sizes are welcome to apply. If you are classified under the standard or universal classifications, then you are eligible to apply. I would say that universities or colleges that have a strong commitment to leader development initiatives and are tied to the mission closely are a great candidate to apply. Campuses that have a lot of cross-campus collaboration, but also campuses that don't have it, are welcome to apply. And I mean, I would say it's almost inevitable to have cross-campus collaboration. Who wouldn't, right? Commitment to public good and democratic process. You know, if your college or university is at all committed to these things, it is probably a good candidate for this classification. If we go more in depth into what the application looks like or what the key elements really are in the application, I would say that we have 8 sections in the application currently, revised from the 2024 version. It is one of the key parts, I would say, is this part of mission and purpose. So universities and colleges are invited to take a closer look at how their mission aligns with this LPP definition. We ask in the application for a closer look at the infrastructure to understand the departments, offices, whatever coordinating mechanism exists within the campus to provide some oversight over all of these efforts. And also any type of institutional strategy. So how does LPP interact or support or help advance things like student success, student retention, DEI, any of the other important initiatives that institutions might have for their planning. We also take a really close look at curricular and co-curricular learning. So courses related to LPP, any co-curricular activities related to LPP are also examined. And we also take a look at faculty and staff engagement. So what opportunities are offered to faculty and staff to, one, further their leadership abilities or skills, and to also support and provide some of those learning experiences for students. And lastly, and I would say really importantly, is assessment. So what assessment mechanisms exist to prove or provide evidence of impact of outcomes related to LPP efforts. One of the, I would say, most common questions that I receive when I'm talking about the LPP classification is, what are the benefits? Why should we do this? And I would say there's a myriad of reasons why you would benefit from the classification, even the classification process, not even getting it if, but one of the more, I would say, cited things is getting this sort of external recognition of your work. Also a more structured framework for reflection, for alignment, and for growth. The amount of folks that have gone through this process and have said that because of this, so many changes are being able to happen on their campus, or they are being able to plan around a specific framework. Also, the visibility, the network of peers that you will gain of other folks that have gone through a similar process and have been recognized. We recently had our first in-person conference of all the classified institutions that was back in March. And we had a lot of reps from the classified campuses. We were able to get together, talk best practices, what was working for folks, what wasn't working, a lot of insider sort of tips and tricks of leadership programming, and we had a lot of fun. And also a great benchmarking tool and a planning tool for the next couple of years if you are in that stage. What to expect for this 2027 cycle? Well, we have, I would say, a lot of a more concise application. Dennis, cover your ears. We have, I think, greater clarity. We have more tools available for our applicants. things like sample applications. We are also launching an LPP peer coaching program where classified campus reps will be able to sort of coach smaller cohorts of folks that are applying, and talk through their experiences and give some more advice on how to navigate the application process, things that I can't do because I wasn't able to participate in Rice's classification application, obviously for reasons. We have a lot of more resources for folks in this cycle, and we learned so much from the 2024 cycle and applied all of those insights to make the application more accessible and more clear, I think. The deadline to purchase the application is January 9th, 2026, which sounds like a really long time from now, but if you are familiar with the CE process, you know that putting together your team, starting the application process starts a long time before that. So I would advise to purchase or start your application before then, to be able to have time to sift through data and be able to choose the best sort of narrative that you can for your application. Submission deadline is June 12th, 2026, which also sounds a long time from now, but it really isn't. It's almost a little over a year, so not that long. And decisions will be made in December 2026, and announcements will be made in 2027, very early January, February. How to get involved now? I would say attending an information session like you are today, and inviting your team, possibly. We have a couple of informational sessions coming up in the summer. So if you have some ideal team members on your campus that you think would be key to participate in this process, you could forward them the information on our sessions for them to attend. Signing up for updates, and I'll provide you some links once I'm done. Joining Higher Led, our free online community sort of platform that we have, where we post resources, recordings of the webinars, give updates, and you can also chat and interact with other folks that are going through the same process. Also exploring the Demystifying Measurement course, and this course is provided by our research and evaluation team at the Doerr Institute. And it focuses on providing the tools for you to be able to effectively measure measure the effectiveness of leadership programming on your campus. It is a very practical course because our instructors, Dr. Ryan Brown and Dr. Aaron Pomerantz, are the ones that do all the measuring and evaluating for us at Doerr Institute. We take measurement really seriously. We actually have we call it a data party coming up in 2 weeks. So we take a day to analyze all the data from our semester and our programs to understand where we are falling short, where we are excelling, if our students, are attending, if there's attrition, if we are meeting our objectives, behavioral, knowledge components, all of those things. Yeah, we do that continuously at the Doerr Institute, and Dr. Brown and Dr. Pomerantz decided that it would be really beneficial for folks to also have the knowledge and be able to apply it on their campuses. So they offer this Demystifying Measurement course. You will get to also have a lot of personalized feedback on assessment mechanisms and assessment programs for your programs. And that will be offered, I believe, fall 2025. So coming up in a short couple of months. And again, I will provide all these links in the chat in a few minutes when I finish up. Before I turn it over to Dennis, I wanted to sort of take a closer look at North Carolina and LPP. So East Carolina University is the only North Carolina classified campus. It was part of that inaugural classified cohort. And I have to, I have congratulated them for their efforts, but I really just want to give a big shout out to Dennis for all the effort it took to put together this application and the flexibility, adaptability that was required because nothing was available or not too many things were available. Dennis would ask me, or folks would ask me, what does this question mean? How are we supposed to answer? Can you give us an example? I'd be like, no, because there are no examples. You're the first ones. So they really had to be flexible, adaptable, creative, and even resilient to go through this process. So big shout out to him and all the other folks that went through the process. As I mentioned, I was looking at North Carolina NC Campus Engagement's mission and comparing it with LPP in the classification. And I see this shared commitment to strengthening democracy, this idea of supporting strategies that prepare students, faculty, and staff to lead for the public good, right? This elusive public good. So I see a lot of alignment. I think the LPP classification would offer member campuses a powerful framework to assess and elevate their commitment to this idea of civic engagement, public leadership, and democratic values. So I see it as a slam dunk. I would also love to see North Carolina have the most amount of campuses classified. It's not a competition, but if it was, y'all could win if you put your mind to it. But yeah, I'll turn it over to Dennis to talk more about his experience and give you any insider tips. And I will share some links and be available for questions afterwards.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carla. And Leslie, thank you for bringing all of us together. This is exciting just to kind of think through, and this is probably the time to do it, when things are a little bit slower, when you have a minute to think carefully and try to be thoughtful about what your next steps are here. So appreciate both of you and your leadership individually as professionals and friends. So I don't have slides, but I just have kind of a few thoughts on this process and what it was like for me as a representative of a campus that was ultimately classified, but then also some of the things we learned as an institution about ourselves, about the gaps, about potential opportunities that exist in this space. And, I think one of the big questions that we had to ask ourselves, which Carla mentioned, is, what do you get for going through this process? And had the chance to work with some colleagues at East Tennessee State University to support them in their community engagement classification, which has a lot of similarities to this one, certainly different, but there are some overlaps. And they did a wonderful job putting together their community engagement classification. And then they had a celebration once they submitted it, and a lunch, and they had a team of like 60 people, and one of their faculty members wrote a song and performed it, and I think he was a music professor, like a country western song about this whole process. And one of the key things is like, well, I forget the line exactly, and I won't sing the song, but it was like, we put so much work into this, and we don't even get paid for it, and we don't even get any money for it either. So it was like, they got a good laugh for the crowd. But you do have to ask yourself, ultimately, what is the value that you place on these types of self-studies. And I do think that, to use kind of a popular phrase, the journey is the destination in many ways for these Carnegie elective classifications. That you're ultimately trying to build community around this work, that we had at ECU that was already loosely formed, but was still unofficial. So ultimately, we were able to bring together a group that started with about 25 individuals on campus that we identified strategically through our Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and our Provost office, and selected them. And then that number grew over time as we got into the thick of the application. And we said, we need this individual, we need this department to weigh in. And our Chancellor's Chief of Staff was really helpful in almost like being a whip, in the legislative sense, to kind of get folks to respond to things, respond to my constant emails for information, asking for information, and getting stuff in on time. So there are all those players that I think came together to help us get this submitted. We officially got our committee together in January of 23 for our first meeting, and then we submitted the application in mid-December of 23, and then we're notified in May, June of 24, last summer. So, for the better part of a year, we were meeting monthly, sometimes more often than that, when we were working in small groups to both brainstorm and talk about ways that we could frame our answers to certain questions, to make sure we're respecting the word limit, but also being truthful, right, about and kind of authentic to what this particular question was asking of us. I also think one thing that we learned, and we've also received the community engagement classification several times, going back to 2006 when it began. I think in that application, there are more questions about sort of civil dialogue, democratic dialogue, and we've had challenges, particularly as a state institution, in talking publicly about those particular issues. And so I think this classification allowed us to kind of navigate this political climate that we're in, this very weird political climate, and stressful. And for what it's worth, everyone can get behind leadership. Our nursing leadership, our nursing school can get behind it, our business school, our arts and sciences leaders, our health sciences leaders. All right, there's a common denominator. So even though there are certainly clear value propositions and political dimensions of leadership learning, there are ways, I think, to discuss it that can unify a campus, that doesn't sort of make people, certain individuals who might be leaders official leaders on campus with big titles, worry about if this would get us in trouble, right? So I just put that out there as something that can be a selling point for this process. The idea of leadership being embedded across the institution feels safe and apolitical, right? We could discuss that at length, right, and all the issues surrounding that, but that's just on the surface. That's what my experience was. I think it also prompted, some of our auxiliary teams, like our advancement team, our institutional research teams, to clean up some of the data resources that they have access to, and make sure that they could put their hands on those data that would help us respond to certain questions more holistically in the application. While at the same time, we realized that we were calling some opportunities a leadership opportunity, or they had leadership in the title, but there was effectively no specific leadership programming or outcomes associated with those things or with those initiatives. So it forced us to really be more precise with our labels and to be honest, right? We have very few organized recognition programs for our leadership learning efforts and our leadership education programs, and for the staff that organize those. So we too did a kind of a thank you lunch that included all the members of our classification team, that grew to like 50, 60 people. And we combined that with a board meeting, ECU board meeting, and had kind of a classification celebration lunch to kind of talk about, to bring those folks together, but to say thank you, but then and to highlight some of the really impressive work that's happening at various parts of the campus. Recognize those individuals who are doing really good leadership scholarship, leadership programming, but then also say, okay, so what's next for us? And I think that's kind of the key question, is like, what's next for us? A couple more things. When we announced this last June, and our news services team did a great job of packaging this and putting it out on our website and all different channels, social media channels. And within a couple of days, I saw our chancellor at an event. It was actually a summer orientation for students, and he came over to me and said, you know, of all the things that he pushes out to certain alums or our board of visitors or kind of a donor group, this was one of the things that people responded to most favorably, right? He's always sort of, you know, the news services folks are nervous about putting stuff out that may attract undue attention or negative attention. And our chancellor said, you know, Dr. Rogers said that that he heard from a lot of alums that said, yes, this is the ECU that I know, that I experienced. This was how I would describe my experience on campus. And that was really affirming to them. That I think that congruity was affirming to them. Like, yes, you know, I learned how to be a better leader, but not just for myself as an individual, to be kind of career focused, but as someone who cares about my local community, who cares about, you know, social issues, who cares about making sure that seeing all diverse perspectives, right? and so that was great to hear him say that, because it sort of energized this body of alums that you know, heard about it and saw you know, ECU being described in the way that they experienced it, right? And I think that language, leadership for public purpose, is really compelling, you know, particularly to alums. A couple more things. I think like I mentioned, it identified some gaps for us, you know, that we don't have consistent leadership outcomes in our courses. And so while that isn't necessarily a problem for the application itself, there are plenty of opportunities for us to articulate them and to kind of come together through our faculty governance and curriculum committees to say, okay, so if we are prioritizing leadership as a key value of ECU, then how are we actually officially embedding it in the classroom, or at least providing some incentives for faculty to teach leadership learning outcomes. If you look at any particular major, I think there's like 300 or 400 different majors across the entire US higher education system. All of those particular majors have some outcome related to leadership, right? Whether it's horticulture, construction management, philosophy, psychology, all of them. So we also recognize that there were funding disparities across the campus with respect to leadership programs. And so how can we make that more equitable? And then also, you know, we needed to make sure that our faculty research incentives were clear, and we were finding ways to track faculty researchers, faculty scholarship, and student affairs scholarship on leadership education. So now we have a working collaborative that is kind of a byproduct. It was loosely organized before, but now it's more official. It's been a byproduct of this whole process. We're trying to provide resources so programs across the institution, colleges, schools, et cetera, can map their outcomes to specific leadership competencies. And we're working towards some common institutional assessment efforts. And we're continue to build community around this work. That includes our professional development committee through student affairs, as well as our office for faculty excellence. So I think that those things are really, you know, helpful and useful and positive outcomes of this whole process. It still remains a talking point for our chancellor at so many different public events. And so that's great to see. But it's also, you know, one of these things that you need to make sure to figure out, okay, so it's not just a stamp of approval or a button on your web page, on your homepage, but something that, you know, should animate your future, should inform your strategic planning. And so now that you've got this classification and the recognition and the kudos for it, then, you know, ultimately, what are you going to do with it? And that's up to each campus to decide that. I'll just put one more note that Carla and I did a podcast kind of on this topic that was maybe a little more informal, which was fun to do with Scott Allen through the International Leadership Association on his podcast. And so you can find it. I'll see if I can find the link if you want to listen to that, just to hear a few other thoughts that may not have been covered today. So, but that's all I got for you. And we kind of maybe open it up to questions for me or Carla.
All right. First of all, I want to thank Carla and Dennis for this great overview and these insights. And so, yeah, we're just going to open it up and invite folks to ask questions. And if you don't want to come off, put it in the chat. I'll be watching so I can read it. Okay, we already have one. Will this be similar to the CE classification in that it is a 3-year cycle, and campuses that obtain the LPP classification will retain it for 6 years?
Yes. We will have the same sort of cycle and timeline as CE.
And feel free to just come off mute or raise your hand. And it looks like Stacey from Davidson.
Hey, I just put it into the chat as well. I am curious, folks have shared that the LPP has a lot of similarities to the community engagement classification. And we saw this year in completing the reclassification here at Davidson, that there are a lot of pieces like deliberative dialogue, right? Or engaging for democracy. So I'm curious, you said there's overlap. What are the distinctive elements of the LPP versus the community engagement classification?
Great question. I would say it will depend on each campus and how you define CE and LPP, but there are some I would say fundamental differences that exist between the two definitions. There can be programs that have both elements or are rooted maybe from a CE sort of viewpoint or framework that also have LPP outcomes or objectives, but they're yeah, it's hard to think of. I'm trying to think of an example from the 2024 applicants. And I would say LPP needs to be rooted in whatever conceptual model or framework is being used on campus. If you're familiar with leadership work or programming, you know that the definition of leadership is so highly debated. So we tried to stay away from using one definition or model in our application and in the framework, and invited folks to provide their approach, their conceptual framework. So folks used things like competency models, holistic models, the social change model. So all these things that might be highly related to or have even for, so I'm thinking one of the applicants had a competency model for leadership where they, shared the competencies that comprised their approach and how they designed and executed leadership programming for faculty, for students. And one of the outcomes I can think was very, they define it as civic engagement or something, similar to that. So there was a link, but they were still distinct in operationally how they came to it and executed the programs. Yeah, I don't know that I did a great job answering that. It's hard to do without a concrete example. I don't know.
Yeah, I can add to what Carla shared. I think yes, that the question, Stacy, about democratic practices, civil discourse, etc. There could be plenty of overlap between your CE application and your LPP application. The rest, though, I mean, for your LPP application, you don't need to talk about, if you don't want to, any of your partnership practices external to the institution, right? Whereas the LPP application, you can solely focus on your internal curriculum, your internal partnerships and collaboration, your funding around this and fundraising around this work, and without mentioning any of your community engagement work. And so there's sort of there's plenty of material that we could have included in our community engagement application that we didn't, because it wasn't by definition, it was leadership work, but it was not by definition community engaged. So, and I believe, Carla, I may be wrong, I may be making this up, but I thought we had a mapping document that looks at the overlap and where they diverge, both classifications. So one of us can put our hands on that and share that with you too.
Yes, we do have that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Other folks? Any questions? Okay, all right. So I saw that, I hope everybody saw that Carla put in all the links that are relevant. And if we don't, I'm trying to stall to get the mapping document. If we don't get it before the call ends, I will send it out to everyone that registered for the call. Okay, any other questions? And then I saw that Dennis put the podcast in, the link to the podcast. So if folks want to listen to that, that also featured Dennis and Carla. Okay, it sounds like,
I think I found it.
okay. So let's wait a second, because I know some of you on this call, your campus is also classified in that other category. And I think it's going to be important that you are able to articulate the difference and determine if it's worth the squeeze.
Yeah, I believe this document is for the previous cycles. So we will need to update that, which is a great reminder. But you could have a better idea of where they converge and diverge.
Okay, and I will use that as an attachment. I will send that as an attachment and all the links in the follow-up email as well. All right, we still have 10 minutes. So is there one final question? Anything else anyone wants to ask?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Could you state what the document does? Does it justify eligibility again? I'm not sure. It kind of went out on me.
The document I just shared?
Yeah.
The one I just shared, this attachment is a comparison of the LPP and CE applications, so that you can see where those sort of converge and diverge and are different.
Great.
So much.
Thanks, Damien. Okay, anyone else? All right, well, as I said, and I'm not competitive, But for the community engagement classification, we are 5th in the nation in North Carolina for having the most institutions classified. I know we also do incredible leadership development, and so I'm throwing out the gauntlet and challenging us to match that or exceed it here in North Carolina to
Yeah.
let folks know how great we are here.
Yeah, so states with 2 classified institutions currently are California, Florida, Maryland, New Jersey, Oklahoma, and Texas.
Oh,
So
it's on. Okay. I thank
you
you
would
all.
need 3. You would need 3.
That's
all.
right, just 3. Okay, so I appreciate this and your time with us. Thank you so much. As Carla said, there are some other upcoming informational sessions and things like that, and so I'll try to link that in the email as well. You've got, what, 9 months before they have to go ahead and apply or download the application or sign up for the application, however that works. But I thank you all so much. Here at NC Campus Engagement, we'll continue to be your partner in planning for this, and I hope you all have a great summer if I don't see you before the fall.
Thanks,
Thank
Leslie.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.